I got the new transmission, T56 Magnum for Chevy, and it does have a different shaft, input shaft on it. It's got a smaller pilot bushing, or pilot bearing. Hopefully the hydraulic clutch will work on this. On the other one, dimensions are the same. The only difference is the input shaft is longer on this one than it is on the other one. But my bell housing had a 1/4 inch spacer in here, so I think that will make up the difference when I take that away. I've got the new transmission in, the Magnum, and I've modified the rear cross member so that it puts it as high up as I can get it towards the transmission tunnel. And then the drive shaft, there's a new yoke on the rear of the tranny, so I had to get a new U-joint for it. And the mounting point is almost identical to where the old transmission was, as far as front to back. But the interesting thing was the drive shaft was hitting the, I forget what you call this, basically a safety rod that, or bar that keeps the drive shaft from falling down onto the road if it disconnects, if the U-joint breaks or drive shaft breaks. So when I first put the drive shaft in, I was at least a 1/4 inch below the lip coming into here. And last year I had it actually closer than it is now. It was about 1/8 of an inch clearance was all I had. So I had to figure out, I was going to cut this bar out of there and bring it down, and then it dawned on me that what I could do was adjust the pivot point for the rear end on these bottom pieces. So I brought this forward as far as I could do, and that brought the pinion up, so instead of being down, it's more level. And it's not quite even as far as being at the bottom of the travel and the top of the travel. I don't think that's a big issue, but it's way better than it was. So hopefully that'll take care of my issues. I also had a lot of vibration in this, and it felt like the drive shaft was out of balance, to be honest, which it may be, but it was happening at slow speeds too. So it was almost like it was binding up. And the shop I took it to, a speed shop, they couldn't really figure it out. They thought that maybe the front yoke was too close to the transmission. It was binding up inside here. The old Tremec transmission had some damage inside it, so that could have been an issue, but I never really felt that. To me, there was a good 1/2 inch of slop between the seal and the yoke, so I didn't think that was the issue. And the more I thought about it, I kind of think that the angle of the drive shaft was just too steep, to be honest. It may not have been, but I kind of kept coming to that. So hopefully with this setup, it's going to be friendlier. I know I have more clearance here, so that's a good thing. If I need to go further, I probably can bring it up a little bit more, adjusting the top bar. But for right now, I've maxed out on the bottom bar. Another transmission related issue I had was the floor plate, the top of the transmission tunnel, didn't match up with the new tranny. So I had this portion was moved back, so I had to cut out a larger section and replace it with a new pan, and then cut out the old console base so it fit better. This is a quick shift kit, short shift kit you can call it, for the Magnum, that has a 4-inch further back shifter location, which I need, but it also keeps the relationship the same. So being that it's not mounted right to the center of the shifter. Moving it back, you still get the same shift feel, I guess, the shift throw, because internally it's a shorter shift setup. So a little pricey, about $475, but I had to have that because I didn't want to screw around with all the pivot points and all that I had before. Really couldn't get this to work well. Of course, the old Tremec had issues, so that could have been a major part of it. But I'd rather do it right, not have to do it twice. Things I did do were on the emergency brake, the front bolts actually go into nutserts now that are embedded into this plate. So when I pull this plate off, which you've got 2 bolts at the front, 1 in the center, 1 at the brake, and then 2 in the rear, I can remove the whole plate and the emergency brake stays with it, the handle. And they're secured with these 2 bolts, but these bolts go into this plate and not into the trans tunnel. So that's a huge time saver when you're playing with it. So I guess I'm right at the point now of about being ready to pull the transmission and the engine out and to get that front cradle powder coated, and when I get it back I can start putting the car back together. But the main reason I bought this new Magnum transmission is because my original Tremec Viper transmission was damaged. I could have had it rebuilt. It was going to cost over $1,000, and I decided why not get the Magnum that's going to be better, and it's a balancing act of, do you want to get something rebuilt and then be the same, or do you want to get something that's better and put your money towards that? So right now I have a Tremec transmission that needs to be rebuilt. If anybody needs a Tremec and you're willing to invest in it, maybe we can make a deal and you can end up with it. It's up to you. I'm going to stick with the Magnum. But the reason that they think that the transmission was damaged is because the input shaft was not center located properly. And I'd never heard of this because I'm used to the old days. We had a pilot bushing in the back of the crank, and your clutch went onto that and everything worked fine. I guess with the new ones, they're on tapered bearings on the shaft, and if the center hole in the bell housing isn't perfectly centered to within 0.005 of an inch, it'll put too much offset torque on the input shaft, and it'll actually damage the input or the bearing that's on that shaft and damage your transmission. So I'm guessing that's probably what happened, because it's the most likely scenario anyway. So what I had to do was, number one, there was a procedure to measure the inside diameter or offset of this bell housing. So you're actually centering based on this area on the inside. And of course there are openings and so on, so you got to be real careful. Also, you don't want to have any plating on it that's going to screw it up. But it's important that this be centered to within 0.005 of an inch. So what I have to do is, there are locating pins in the block which come through the inner plate. I can spin this so you can see it right there. So your normal locating pins, and on most engines these are 1/2 inch, but on the Chryslers, the Gen 3 Hemis, they're 0.497 inch, And if you put a 1/2 inch in there, you could potentially crack the casting on the block because they won't go in properly. 3/1000ths of an inch could make enough difference to damage your block. So there is a company called Rob MC that sells special pins that you can put in, and these are different than the ones from other companies that they're 0.497 inch instead of 0.5 inch. So what you do is you put this into the block, and it has an offset on it that you can, in my case, I had 7/1000 pins. So it will shove whatever in the direction that I put the pins in, it'll move that bell housing in that direction. So you can change whatever direction you want to make the housing go. These are really nice. They've got an Allen screw that tightens them up internally. And you've got screwdriver flats that allow you to turn it to kind of tweak it and make it right. So they aren't very expensive. I think they're like $50 to including shipping. So in that case, that's one nice thing about it. But the thing I had to do too on the bell housing is I took it to a machine shop and had them flatten this face, because if this face is not parallel to the base that goes towards the engine block, you'll get an offset reading because you'll be kind of cattywampus. So all that comes into play, because when you put your transmission on, you don't want your tranny off a few thousandths in any direction that way. It's got to be perfectly parallel to the block. So I had that done. That was $150, and you know, you just get things that just keep adding up on your cost, and all you want to do is put your transmission back on. When you take on a project like this, you better be prepared to pay some additional costs. In this case, the bell housing came with the car, but as I said, the transmission was damaged, so I assumed the bell housing was out of center. So after talking to the transmission company, American Performance, they finally told me that I needed a centering plate. You can't just center on the inside of the bell housing. You've got to actually get a centering plate that has an exact hole to measure. So I did that. So $150 later, and then I go to put it on and find out that it will not fit into the bell housing. The spacing is off. So at this point, I can't just respace those holes because I don't know where the true center is on the bell housing. So what does that force me to do? Buy a $1,000 bell housing. So the stock, well, the original bell housing is now worthless to me. Kills me to spend the money on this, but you can't just stop a project and say, oh, I'm not going to finish it. So you got to spend the money. So here is the replacement bell housing. And the original one was about $500 10 years ago when Tom did it, but the costs have gone up and doubled. So I was just under $1,000 to get this. Fortunately, I've got it. I'm not waiting, but I've spent a month basically trying to center this bell housing and do some wiring, and I've got the wiring about done. But, if I can get this centered up, if I can get this back together, get the engine back in it, and I'll be making a huge jump on the car. So it's got to be done, as much as it pains me. So I'll take this all off, put the new one on. Centering plate should fit. I'm going to test that now, and then I can get it centered up tonight, hopefully. One difference I noted between the old flange plate and the new one is the new one has much larger holes, except for where the locating pins go. Where with this one, they were about 2/3 the size. And I did have a problem getting, if I really pushed this to extremes, that the bolt would actually hit on the inside of the hole and prevent the bell housing from moving. So that is one nice feature of the new plate. It has more wiggle room. So in the end, what you're looking to do is get your out of center tolerances to be within 5/1000ths of an inch of zero. So in this case, you can see I was within 6/1000ths at the worst case, but by changing my reference point from the bottom to this position, all my numbers came within value. So I took this measurement by turning the crank 1 full revolution, and then recalibrated the 0 to be here, and then did another revolution. You can see all these numbers go within 3/1000ths of where they were before because we changed it by 3/1000ths at the 0 point. So your negative numbers means the bell housing is closer to the center. Positive numbers mean it's further out. But the worst case is the 4/1000ths, and that's within the 5,000 spec. So I am good to go. How long did this take me? Putting the bell housing on, the alignment plate, getting all this centered, I'm looking at over 2 hours of work just to do that. As crazy as it sounds. But it's got to be done if I want the transmission to survive, so I did it. So now I've got, between the bell housing, the alignment plate, and the transmission, I'm about 6,500 into it, including the shifter. So not a cheap upgrade, but pay for it once and not be worried about it down the road is my philosophy. One of the hardest things to do on this is to get your gauge so that it's centered and not interfering with this small hole that's in this alignment plate. I can say that this is probably 2/3 of the work is to do this. If they made this hole a couple inches bigger, piece of cake, because everything would fit right in there. But you've got to get everything inside so that you can take this bell housing on and off a couple times, because you'll have to change these alignment pins that index which direction the bell housing moves, have to be changed out. So you got to take the 4 bolts out from the engine, pull the bell housing off, and of course if all this is on the outside, it interferes getting it off, so you got to take the plate off. And so the way I've got it set up now is I can pull the bell housing with the plate still on it and get it back in, as long as I pull this index or the needle up out of the way. So it's not too bad now, but it's just getting to this point is a real pain in the butt. And other people agree with me, because that's the biggest knock against these plates, is how small of a hole they put in here. Don't know why they needed to make it so small, but so I couldn't leave well enough alone, and I decided to see if I can get it closer. So here's how I've done. I need to document this in case there's a transmission warranty issue. They need the proof that you actually did this indexing, so this will be my proof. that's where we stand this weekend. Hopefully get the hydraulic clutch straightened out. I've got to get a new slave cylinder. You can see it on the front there. That one doesn't quite match up. So that'll be the next step. But hopefully in another week or so I'll be able to drop this engine back in the car.